Hi, I'm Tim Zacharias with Cougar USA and your host of Building Value. Got another virtual episode today. Got a Zoom call here with Nicole Hodina from Filterman. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Hi, good morning, Tim. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to be able to try something. This is my first first Zoom meeting that goes like this. So really appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the key questions that are being asked today.
All right. Yeah. And like you said, we're going to be covering air filtration in hospitals and commercial buildings today. Also going to be talking about the new guidelines from ASHRAE and NAFA and how those are going to affect building operations going forward.
On Building Value, we go behind the scenes at some of the most iconic buildings in Texas to showcase the incredible people that design, build, and maintain them and their impact on the community.
So, Nicole, can you tell me about where you grew up and what you did after high school?
Yeah, I grew up in a rural town in Minnesota, graduated the class of 25, and that was 3 towns combined, so a very small rural area. And once I graduated high school, I wanted to be independent, and so I joined the United States Marine Corps, and that was my first time away from home, so that was
Oh,
a
wow.
really big culture shock. And while I was in the service, that's where I met my husband, Michael, and we've been since married, and now we're looking about 15 years already.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely thank you for your service as well. That's amazing. And so, how did you translate, or how did you go from that military service into the business world?
Yeah, my husband is an entrepreneur. He's been talking about trying to buy a business for basically since we were first married. It took us a whopping 10 years to finally find the right one. But in the meantime, as we got out of the Marine Corps, we had moved to Chicago as the halfway city between where both of our parents lived at the time. And then decided that wasn't the city for us. And that's how we found our way to Texas. And my husband's really spent a lot of time trying to find different businesses, looking at where their locations were at, the style of business that they were. Originally looking for a type of distribution company. His family's predominated in the business industry. His father's been an excellent resource in trying to help us find what we're looking for and making sure that we've got all the details worked out. And along the way, the Filterman came along, and Mr. Phil Maybee and his wife Karen were running the business, and they were looking to get into retire. And so we had the opportunity to start working with them, and absolutely fell in love with everything when we first started working with it. Mr. Phil Maybee's got a lot of knowledge in the industry and very patient, excellent teacher. And he's really got a lot of things figured out, had some great relationships. He's taken me under his wing to help me be, anywhere near what he was. And he's got some really big shoes to fill, but I'm sure working hard to fill them in there.
That's great. And so, can you just tell me a little bit about the Filterman, what you do, who it is that you're serving?
Absolutely. Filterman's been around for about 25 years. As I mentioned, Mr. Phil Maybee was the founder, and started small time out of the house, kind of working things out of the garage. And as he grew the business, moved into larger warehouses, et cetera. But the really important thing that Phil did was he saw there was a gap in the industry. He had already been in the filter industry, kind of seen some of the things that were going on. And there's no such thing as the filter police out there. There's nobody coming in necessarily saying, hey, you're doing this right, you're not doing this right. And he saw a big gap that needed to be filled. And he really spent time understanding the industry, understanding how particle sizes work, how filters work, and just gave a more well-rounded education to our customers so that they knew what they had, whether it worked. And we, being a distributor, we have the benefit of cherry picking the best products from specific manufacturers. And there's no better way to test a product than real life application. And Phil has done a lot of that with the trust of our customers, understanding we've got their best interest in mind. And we've really been able to pick a lot of excellent products that have been proven time and time again that they really work.
It's a great story. You love hearing that, that the founders finding that niche or that missing piece in the market, and then being able to fill it, and especially using education to help the customers is, definitely something that we try to do as well. Obviously, my virtual background here is our training center, so we're all on board on the education. So, what types of buildings are y'all working in, and who is it that you typically work with?
We're in all sorts of buildings. I would say hospitals are our primary market. We've got several hospitals throughout Houston and Temple and San Antonio that we work with. Primarily on the day-to-day basis, we're working directly with the engineers. We've come across a lot of things that the engineers will say, hey, my air handler is doing this. What could be wrong with it? And, we come out there and we look at it and we get down to the source. Okay, what's the problem? And really help them root cause what's going on so we can get a solution going forward. And in addition to the hospital segment, we spend a lot of time in commercial buildings and high rises, as well as nursing facilities and schools and colleges.
Okay. Yeah, it's great. And I mean, especially right now, being in the hospitals, I'm sure is a changing market for sure, and air filtration in high demand.
It
So what?
absolutely is.
I think you've touched on it a little bit, but what is it that makes Filterman different than some of the other options out there?
Right. Well, you look at your differences between manufacturers and distribution, and what we're able to do with distribution is provide an entire service arm that really helps solidify what it is that we're working with. When we have a new customer, or oftentimes when our engineers or property managers move to a different building or facility, they take a look at their equipment and they say, man, hey, Filterman, I'd really, really like for you to come out here and take a look at this. And we go through each air handler. We look at how the filters are fitting and how they're performing. And then we take the measurements necessary to make sure the filtration that we put in there has a proper fit. One of the biggest things we see going into a lot of facilities is a lot of gaps and bypass. We look at what gasketing is needed to get a seal between filters, and in front load frames, making sure you have P-clips that secure the filters into the frame. If you don't have that, oftentimes you'll see the filters falling out of the unit, which completely defeat the purpose of having any protection on the unit whatsoever. And as we provide them the types of filtration and options that work best for them, we oftentimes see that coils or other parts of the equipment are fouled because there was not proper filtration in the first place. And that's where the technology of UVC really started coming to light in the HVAC industry. And we can utilize that technology, taking measurements and sizing and where we can put the installations in to be able to have enough UVC to restore that coil back to closer to where it was originally designed to perform.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm learning as you're talking. We're more on the water side of the building, so this is interesting for me to learn the air side of the building. So what are the typical applications that you're using air filtration, and what other technologies are you pairing with the filters?
Yeah, so a lot of where we've gone forward with technology is we've been using synthetic filters. When you look at seeing styles of cardboard, Houston's a very, very humid climate, and moisture and paper, they tend to not mix well, and we see degradation, we see microbial growth, we see these things that we don't want to be seeing in our equipment. So we have different, it depends on what MERV or what MERV rating, minimum efficiency reporting value, that you're looking for your building. As we'll kind of get further into discussion later on about what ASHRAE is pointing towards as far as suggestions for outlines. We look at what products are going to fit in that unit. So for a side load track, and we're looking to have a MERV 10 efficiency, we'll use the link style filter with synthetic media that can fill the full length of the track and not have any bypass. And if you're looking for a higher efficiency, you know, we look towards our Aeolus mini pleat, which has a much greater square footage of media so you're looking about 125 square foot of media in the same 24 by 24 floor as you would get about 25 square foot of media in a cardboard, just standard pleated filter.
Oh,
So it
wow.
becomes really important to look at those sorts of things as you're moving forward with efficiencies. And pairing, we often pair our filters if needed, especially if the unit needs to be refurbished. We'll look at the insulation inside of the unit. It can degrade over time, it can grow things. So depending on the condition of that insulation, we'll either remove it entirely and then we'll coat the inside of the unit. Or if the insulation is still intact, then we just encapsulate everything underneath that and coat that to ensure that anything that was starting underneath there just stays inside of that. And
Interesting.
UV, of course, has so many different applications. You know, just in the HVAC equipment, we were talking about the ILs, which are directly on the coil, but there's UV for surface disinfection as well as air purification. So there's mobile units that you can put in rooms. There's units that you can put into your ductwork and then be able to purify the air before coming into the occupied space.
Interesting. And I think the you mentioned it a little bit, but now we're starting to hopefully get into the backside of this COVID-19 pandemic going on. I think 60 days or something now of the stay home, work safe orders. And obviously we're doing this call virtually over Zoom and practicing our social distancing. So as we're starting to see these buildings get ramped up to be occupied again, what challenges are the building engineers going to face having a building that was unoccupied and now moving towards being occupied? And what else are they going to have to do to address the COVID-19 virus specifically?
Right. One, they're going to have to get used to having people around all over again. uh,
Yeah, we all got kind of used to
but
our own bubble, huh?
yeah, outside of that, tenants ask a lot of questions to the facilities. You know, what filters do we have? When's the last time we changed them? How are you going to keep me safe? You know, there's a lot of questions that these engineers are being asked, and I've helped them with a lot of answering these questions. And one of the buzzwords when it comes to filtration efficiencies is a MERV 13. ASHRAE and ASHRAE 52.2 testing is where we come up with our levels of efficiency, and they measure that by the particle size that they're capturing. And in typical applications pre-COVID-19, a MERV 6 or a MERV 8 was an acceptable level of filtration for building. And as we look into additional preparedness, especially with COVID-19, just because that is literally on the forefront of everybody's mind, the idea behind a MERV 13 filter is to be able to capture the particle size of which the COVID virus does exist. So in the realm of particle sizes, we're talking about a 0.3 micron size particle, and it's not just the singular virus size that we're looking for. It's a cluster. So when you think of somebody sneezing, there's larger nuclei droplets that are coming from there, and from those droplets are the finer particles that can carry the virus, and those are the ones that tend to stay airborne. And looking at circulation of air, looking at what your building is exhausting out air when the fresh air coming into the building and recirculated air. The recirculated air, if being filtered at a MERV 13, is going to capture about 75% of that particle size, ranging between the 0.3 and 1 micron. And when you get to some of the larger sizes, you're looking at a 90% or higher capture and efficiency.
So how does that, I mean, if a building originally had the lower MERV rating and they jump up to the higher MERV rating, what effect does that have on the rest of the air system? The ductwork and the fan, things like that.
Well, Right, and that's a really important question, and it's a lot of questions that a lot of engineers are being faced with. Most commonly in especially commercial buildings, we see side load 2-inch tracks. And with that being said, that really limits the filter styles that you can put in that will fit in those tracks to be able to get that proper gasket and seal. When you look at that 2-inch depth, and now we're going to have a filter going from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13, there's a lot more restriction going across that filter, which increases the fan power and the amount of energy that it takes to run that same equipment. We look at this in a couple different ways. How important is having MERV 13? Okay, if you decide as a building, I want to be the premier, I want to be the best, I've got to have it. And we look at only using existing frames. We've tried the 2-inch mini pleat, which has more square footage of media than just the cardboard style pleat. However, one thing that we suggest is to modify the entire track to be able to fit the 4-inch. When you're looking at what filter to choose for a MERV 13, one of the things that's really important to consider is that initial pressure drop. If you look at, okay, my existing filter A, we're starting with the 0.2 pressure drop, okay, and we're looking at double the initial pressure drop before we change it. Now let me get this MERV 13 in the same style filter, initial pressure drop starting at 0.7. That's a pretty big spike when you look at,
Yeah.
changing just that one filter changes that. So when we look at using 4-inch depth with that mini pleat with 125 square inches, we're able to keep a low pressure drop. We got a starting pressure drop that usually ranges between 0.1 and 0.25 initially, with depth loading capabilities and a filter that'll just last a lot longer.
Gotcha. So is that is a service that y'all would go in and change that track out so that they could put in the different filter to decrease that pressure drop? Is that right?
Yes. And before we just go in and make any track modifications, we're looking at what the equipment's capabilities are, what's the CFM across the filter when we're looking at what style of filtration that we're using on it. And the CFM is one of the most important factors when understanding how to make these changes to existing filtration.
Interesting. And so, and like you said, a lot of this is going to be driven from the tenant side or maybe the patient side. If we're talking a hospital, what are they,
Mhm.
what are you doing to protect us as tenants or patients in this building? So is that MERV 13, is that really where they need to be going to be protected? I know this is still new and there's a lot of discussion about how the virus is transmitted airborne and how does that play into the HVAC system. So is that MERV 13 necessary, or is there other things that they could do to protect their building and their tenants?
Sure, there's more than just the filter efficiency that you can do to protect tenants. When it does come to level of efficiencies, MERV 13 and higher, you can look into MERV 16 and HEPA's, and in hospital applications, their equipment is designed. You look at different operating rooms and they're going to have HEPA filtration, after you've got your pre-filter, your coil, and then your final filter, and that's where those HEPAs are going to be, or in the ceiling at the specific OR room, and that's going to get down to the particle size that they need. Oftentimes, we're seeing commercial properties inquire about HEPA filtration, and we're still talking about these 2-inch tracks here, and it's just not realistic. You'll never get enough air, across that. And so when you look at the size it captures and, studies that have been done, the Wells-Riley report that was founded by NAFA, they really looked at where in the realm of filter efficiency did things drop off. And they did 3 different studies. They did a study on commercial buildings, hospitals, and schools. And they each had their own accepted parameters of, what their norm would be like. And what I saw in especially the commercial buildings, specifically to the influenza flu, was that once you got up to a MERV 13, the graph didn't change much as far as how much anything higher than a MERV 13 would really be a benefit. And in understanding filtration and limitations of air supply, there's no way to 100% guarantee nothing is going to get going to get through anything. You know, HEPA is 99.99999 on the
Right.
zero point 0.3 size micron. There's still, you know, that level in there. But I've really seen a spike in UV as one of the safeguard ways to really protect building and occupants. We've got several on coils, and that benefits a facility in more than one way. You know, anything that might have started to grow on there because particles had gotten on their coils, you're looking at disinfecting that. And at 75% on that 0.3 micron, you've got some that could have gone through that filter. But if it's on that coil surface and that UV's on there, that UVC will destroy any and all biological contaminants, which does include virus. And I've seen it used in Airstreams. We'll put, for example, a bio wall. It's got 5 lamps on it, and it's either 40 inches long or 60 inches long. That runs, you know, horizontal and parallel in the ductwork with the airflow. And that's getting a 99.99% disinfection rate of that airstream before it's entering occupied space. So even if your facility isn't able to start with the MERV 13, or even if you're looking for other options to be able to protect tenants and protect the spaces that they're in, UV is a really viable option. And you know, you've got another surface disinfection. It's used more in the hospital world, but it's an aseptics unit, and it's basically a stand-up UV unit and it comes with two different sections, and you put it in a room. Typically, the measurements has been in hospital beds unit, and looking for getting a room ready for surgery. And that UV sterilizes all the surfaces in that segment. So I've been starting to get some inquiries about how to use something like that in a commercial world. We've kind of entertained that idea, but nobody's really, it's an investment, definitely.
Sure.
And some that aren't so much of an investment are mobile units. You know, we've got those capable of 300 CFM. So you're looking at hosting a meeting, and let's say you're going to be pushing your social distancing limits with how many people are in there, and to be able to, you know, plug in a UV portable unit to be able to circulate in the cubic space of the room and disinfect that room. You know, you can give somebody a peace of mind that, you know, you're disinfecting that air, you know, while you're all in there. And especially in a closed conference room, you don't get as much air circulation. When you look at how many, moving those small particle sizes, the introduction of the air into that existing space really helps to minimize the spread of that as far as the air is concerned. And so those become really important. And there's also, you know, smaller ones that more designed for, you know, your little office. Let's say you host the meetings in there, and you don't necessarily want to wear a face mask, but you still want to know that you have that level of protection. That's definitely something that you can look at.
And what would a building need to do if they had someone who had been on their property that tested positive for COVID-19? You know, I think there's a lot of talk about some of the initial cleaning that would happen, but how does that affect their HVAC system and the filtration?
Well, if you take under consideration you've already cleaned any surface areas around it with the proper PPE, you know, looking at what could have been re-entrained back into the HVAC equipment. So depending on, it could have been exhausted out of the building, but let's say it did not. Let's say it went recirculated back into your HVAC equipment, and you know what floor and you know what filters were affected. And I'm going to give the example of, let's say you've already have a MERV 13 filter in there and you're capturing the majority of those particles, and you want to say, okay, we just need to change every filter. We had a COVID patient that could get re-entrained back into the unit. Well, the purpose of using that filter in the first place was to capture that particle. So no, you don't need to replace that filter. You're looking at it being captured in the media, and it's not going to release until you physically beat it or cut it out of that filter into a dust release. So as far as that's concerned, that virus is going to die off. It's not going to have anything to grow on. So by the time you need to change the filter, there's not going to be a live virus there to even have an impact. For one of my other customers, when this was first going on, they were told to use bag in, bag out procedures to change filters because they could be contaminated with COVID. Bag in, bag out is used typically on isolation fans in hospitals, where you have a plastic bag around your filter and it never touches the airspace because you have that seal on it, and you pull out that filter, and then when you're replacing it, you replace it with the same process. There's a very specific list of written procedures written by NAFA to follow in order to do a bag in, bag out. So they wanted to take those principles and apply this to a commercial building, which in reality, it's not an apples to apples comparison. But what I help them do is take key concepts of the bag in, bag out process to be able to properly have PPE. You want to look at a face mask and gloves. You want to look at not having any exposed skin. If you think what you're coming in contact with has this virus, similar to what you'd see the medical professionals wearing that are handling COVID things. It's a visualization, that's what you're going to want to look like. And the point next would be to put it in some sort of a plastic bag and get a seal on it before you'd go into the next phase. So you can take the concepts of something like a bag in, bag out and apply it to what you think could be infected. However, just to understand that just because it was exposed to COVID-19, that it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be changed, and that virus will die off on that filter, and it will again be like changing a filter any other day of the week without, the additional viruses. And another thing to be known about that, we understand COVID because we hear about it all the time, but there's sick people in buildings all the time. And so if you really think about it, there is a lot of PPE involved. You should wear masks and gloves when you're looking at changing filters. There's a lot of dirt and debris that you can physically see, but what you don't see is what biological contaminants could or could not be on that filter.
Yeah, it's a good point. And, I think another area where that's going to change maybe the way that daily occupations in a
Mhm.
building, how that care you're taking in changing out that filter, not reintroducing or getting anything out of it, reintroducing it back into the air. Again, just not things that are maybe top of mind now, but will be going
We'll be
forward.
going forward.
Yeah. No, that's great. Great information. So if let's say if a building engineer is looking at their building now and they have, say, that lower MERV rating of 6 or an 8, and they want to look at upgrading the filter technology up to that MERV 13 or higher, or maybe adding some of this UV or other protections, what is a good way for them to go about figuring out how they can upgrade their building?
Right. Well, first I'd suggest they call the Filterman. Uh,
Of course.
but we do have a team that can help answer these questions. All of our sales reps are more than happy to answer any of these questions. We'll come out to your facility. We'll take a look at what you have. Let us know your parameters. We'll try help you find a solution that can fit your budget and your style. If you've got a 50-story building and your budget's really small, what's important? What's the most important? Let's take a look at what your most critical area is, or what is going to make the largest impact, and let's start with something there. And the biggest thing to understand is you don't have to do everything all at one time. Take things step by step. Rome wasn't built in a day. Take a look at what your facility's capabilities are. Where are you going to get the best results for what you're looking for? And we help you identify those things and come up with solutions for you to be able to, you can go back to your tenant and say, hey, this is what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. Or, it might also be something where they can use it to add on. Okay, tenant X, we're interested in these. Based on what you're currently paying for your rent, this doesn't include this. Is this something you want to add? And you can look at it at more than one way at that point of how to proceed.
We've talked about some of the higher MERV rated filters, and UV is, the ultraviolet light is the technologies for combating some of these airborne contaminants or viruses. What other technologies are available that people could use in their building?
Yeah, there's quite a few other options as far as looking at what services can be provided and some preparedness for your equipment that you can do. Although UV is great for the coil cleaning, it has a return of investment of usually 1 to 3 years. But for those that we're not ready to budget those sorts of things, we can do coil cleaning services. I kind of talked about the cleaning and encapsulation of the overall hygiene. That's one of the biggest things tenants want to know, is their equipment clean? We can come in and inspect equipment and into the ductwork, clean coils, clean that ductwork, clean the blower fan, and clean down into the ductwork. And we've had in many cases where we've done that sort of service, within 1 to 2 days, it goes, "Oh, did you change something on that unit? There's so much more airflow." Or, "Man, it smells so different in here." And it's like, yeah, and those sorts of hygiene things, things that might, not be on the forefront on your daily checklist. Those are things that we can come in and help get your building ready, as far as that hygienic state. Um, we look at the equipment inspections and what other parts can lead to issues in the equipment. We found a case this week where there was moisture in a duct where there shouldn't have been moisture. And when we went through all the different ceiling tiles to look at different ducts, we had found a section of duct was bowed out and it was releasing all this air. So when the unit was turned off, that cold, wet moisture just started going into that insulation there. And so, we really take the time to root cause problem. If you see something caused it, and we like to figure out the source of what caused it, and that way you prevent it from happening again. If you only fix what the outcome was, then it is going to happen again. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen. And particle counts, you want to see what size particle counts. How well is your current filters working now? It might say a MERV8. Is it performing better than that? We can come in and take particle counts and see where each of the rooms are at and where there's variances. And we use a third-party testing lab for, if you're thinking that some specific mold or virus, or if you're looking for something specific in your air, we can actually grab samples of the air, send it off for testing, and find out, what is exactly going on there if you think you might have, an issue going on. And as far as anything else with that, we're coming up with new things all the time. You see something new, you adapt to it, and you kind of you make things happen that way. So
All right. No, those are great, added things to look at, especially maybe some of the duct cleaning or some of the things you just mentioned. Maybe potentially good options as people are looking to open their building, or right now where they have lower occupancy, maybe a good time to take advantage of some of that.
absolutely, it certainly is. And another thing that we look at in different building segments is, odors, and odors, where they come from. I had mentioned, a room might smell different after a hygiene clean, because there might have been some growth in there. But we look at some other things that cause odors, especially in big cities. You've got your sump pit rooms and some other things like that that are in parking garages, and you're walking by them and wow, the smell will nearly knock you off your feet. It's just such a strong odor. Although carbon is used for specific types of odor, we found UV in those applications also works very well. The UVV wavelength that's used in those lamps and in those circulation devices, it breaks down the contaminants to something that's breathable and removes out the odor of there. So we've had a lot of parking garages we've saved from those odors, as well as I've seen one hospital we had, they had a sump pit room outside of their building. And every week when it was getting cleaned out, the just smell in the hallway it was odoriferous. And we went down and looked at it, and it had been in an enclosed space, and they decided to open it and make it an open space. Well, right outside of that open space was an air intake into the building. So all that odor was just getting pulled directly into the building. And we looked at, okay, if we use this sizing of UV, close the entire section, and it will diminish that odor. And sure enough, that made the odors contained in that room. It took it out of there, and it kept it from getting re-entered into the building in occupied space.
Interesting. Now you're talking my language when we're talking sump pits. that that we're crossing over into our world over here. So I definitely,
All right.
as you're describing that, I'm like, I know exactly the smell that she's talking about,
It's a
and
smell.
it is, and
It doesn't
a
go away
grease,
right away either.
no, and a grease pit especially is very special smell that you won't forget. And we have some covers that can help contain that odor, but like you said, once you open it and you get in there to do your work, there's not really much you can do. So especially if it's near that outside air. So that's an interesting application for the UV for sure. Gotcha. And like you said, your teams can come out and take a look. Is that the part where you would be looking at those tracks like you described, and maybe areas where they could add the UV potentially, things like that?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And that's something that's part of what we do. We don't, it's not coming out to say, hey, I'm going to charge you X to come take a look at your facility. It's not like that at all. And I don't want anybody to ever be discouraged from asking the question. There's no such thing as a stupid question. If you've got a question, or if you're not sure about something, ask. We'll be happy to come out and take a look at it. There might be something that we've got a more challenging part ahead of us than we ever thought. And Mr. Phil Maybee, who our founder, is still our senior advisor and technical expert. So we have that backbone that even if we come across something, and we've come across a lot of things so far, but it's just knowing that we've got that technical advantage in all those years in the industry, then it's really helpful to be able to have that support.
Sure. And there's been a lot of guidelines that have come out from different organizations. ASHRAE, in particular, just came out with their guidelines for operating buildings now that we're starting to open them back up. How are some of those new guidelines going to affect the operation of these air systems, and how they should be maintaining their filters?
All right, it's going to have a big impact. I think within the first 30 minutes of ASHRAE posting those standards, my phone didn't stop ringing. uh, and everybody's trying to be the first one to get their filters on order, and it becomes kind of a challenge. We want to make sure we get everybody taken care of. It's important to everybody to say, okay, we're meeting these standards. But what we're seeing is people are trying to just jump into just to say they have the MERV 13 as the checkbox. And where we try to look at when we're upgrading to MERV 13, we're really trying to make sure that it works. And in some cases, we're looking at, you need a track upgrade to really make this work, but I'm opening next week and I need something right now. And so we try to accommodate the time is of the essence with these things, but with the understanding, hey, we need to go back and follow through with this. We're going to have to start monitoring how your equipment's handling this. And that will also dictate the timeline of which some things need to be updated. And, with the guidelines, and I agree with the MERV 13. When you look at a lot of the buildings changing to that, it's a foreign concept. MERV 8's always been enough, or this has always been enough, but you're looking at an efficiency that's only capturing less than 50% of the particle sizes that are fouling your equipment and potentially contaminating the occupied space. And you ask an engineer, if you had a drill that only worked 50% of the time or lless, would you still use it?
Sure.
And you
No,
start
probably
to
not.
you start to ask yourself those things. And I quoted that directly from Phil Maybee. That's one of my favorites. You really got to put it in concept of something else that they can relate to be able to get that, oh, okay, I never thought about it that way kind of moment. And that's where education really is a big deal. And I can't stress that enough. That's a really core of what we do is the education.
So, those guidelines are out there, and I think y'all have some guidelines as well. Where can people go to find that information?
Sure. Filterman is definitely, we are part of NAFA, which is the National Air Filtration Association. NAFA works in coordination with also ASHRAE, and we've talked about the guidelines that ASHRAE's posted. Everything's on their website. Phil Maybee was past president of NAFA. He had a lot to do in the involvement of writing the book. I do suggest ordering these books. We do offer NCT training to our customers, and we have several of our customers that have actually taken the exam and are certified. But that book, the books that are around that you can get from NAFA really go into detail of not only particle sizes and what filters capture, the different filter styles and how they work in different applications. And as the years have gone by, there's been different revisions. UV is now included, as its own chapter in the books, and it's really great material. You're getting your facts directly from there. I've learned in the filter industry, I had mentioned before, there's no such thing as filter police, but everybody kind of has their own take on things. And in my opinion, we kind of get away from where the origination of those things came from, and to be able to follow what we do based on the NAFA guidelines and ASHRAE guidelines. I think that's a really important thing, and everybody who's dealing with filters or dealing with anything in the HVAC really should make sure that who they're working with has their best interest in mind and is providing them the information that they really need to make informed decisions.
That's great. And I think it definitely on the YouTube posting, we'll have links to those guidelines that you're referencing, so people can get to those, and as well to the Filterman website to be able to find that information as well. So where do you see this going, say in 6 months, 9 months, where we've changed filters, how much they're having to cycle the outside air and things like that? How is that going to affect filter performance over time, and how can they monitor that?
Oh, that's a really good point. I touched very briefly on it earlier when I was talking about an initial pressure drop of a filter. When we look at filter changes, we use the filter maintenance guidelines. And those guidelines are, you want to change your filter when the life of the filter is used, not based on just a date. Many organizations will say, oh, we want to change this quarterly or biannually, and understand that that might be easy on the time sense, but that's not necessarily cost effective. Looking at the 4-inch filter, we've seen those things last 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 years, in applications before they've needed to be changed. And all of that varies on, how the air is getting pulled into the unit and what particle sizes they're capturing. You're looking at 100% outside air. Those filters are going to get filled up a lot faster than on another floor that might use a combination of outside air and recirculated air. And so there's some hospital facilities that we actually, every month we go out there and we monitor the pressure drop across the filters and do visual inspections and recommend their filter changes based on that filter life cycle. And we've got commercial buildings we've helped with the same, where we've put magnehelic gauges on the unit so that way they can measure their pressure drop, because we want these filters to last their lifetime. When you look at putting these in, this is an investment, and you want to protect your equipment and you want to protect the building occupants. And that's really what the goal is.
Interesting. So yeah, I would think that potentially they're going to see these filters clog up faster, like you said, if they're using more outside air going forward. So definitely something to add to their PMs, or to have y'all offer that service that you mentioned.
Yeah, but now we're kind of as far as where we see things going in 6 months from now, and it's been interesting on the day-by-day basis, all the changes with COVID. And this isn't the first of outbreaks or anything, or labeled pandemic, that really made it a big difference here. But in looking at cases of H1N1, the swine flu, a lot of buildings that have already upgraded to MERV 13 today made those changes when we had come across some other things. And I would like to see that this stays fresh in people's minds for the understanding. Don't take those things for granted. don't get sloppy. All right, enough time goes by. It's not all over the media anymore. And they start kind of, not caring as much. And I hope we don't see that happen. And I hope these things stay fresh in people's minds as far as this is what we need to do to take care of our equipment. And we do this because we care. And, especially in hospitals, if that was your daughter or your mother using those in those rooms that needed that filtration, how would you want that to be? And that's how we like to think about things when we're going through and we're helping people.
It's a good point. And, I think for everybody, the quarantine fatigue is definitely starting to set in. And, we're getting, letting out the leash a little bit to say, hey, we can, go back out to restaurants and do these things. And so hopefully, like you said, we don't slip too far the other way and kind of forget why we kind of went through all of this in the first place. So I think it is going to be interesting as we kind of find that new normal, especially, with just in life and in the kind of the building operations, like you said. So what advice would you have for property or facilities managers that are in that decision-making process right now of, what do we need to do to make our building safe?
That's a laundry list of questions. Um, but the biggest thing, take a look at what you have now. How is it working? What efficiencies do we have? What precautionary measures? I've seen not only the styles of UV that we work with, but other types of UVs in applications and ways that maybe are more prominent in other countries. And my biggest piece of advice would look at everything as a whole and then break it into smaller pieces. You're looking at your end section here being, we want to open at full capacity. And how do we do it? And how do we do it safely? And some of that means a little bit at a time. Some of that will have to do with air filtration. Some of it will have to be with hygiene practices for the people in the occupied space. Understand there's a lot of pressure on building owners, but also they need to make sure that those tenants that are in that space are following safe practices and doing safe rules. When you see the hand sanitizers everywhere, and I look at how many times before pre-COVID, how many times did I wash my hands a day? And my answer is actually all the time. In and out of mechanical rooms, I'm always getting dirty, so I'm always washing my hands. But now I'm washing my hands for a different reason. Even when I'm not in front of those units and my hands aren't getting dirty, you wash every time. Wash before you eat. And it's those really simple things, but they go so far. And it kind of seems interesting as a society that we're having to be told to wash your hands.
Sure.
When you want to really look at things that way.
Yeah. If we kind of look further into the future, what do you see? How do you see the COVID pandemic changing the air design or air filtration in these buildings looking out into the future?
Looking out into the future, I would like to see that people took the time to make sure they did things right. I kind of see a fork in the road where you're going to have those that took this really seriously and they invested the time to make sure that they have things running right from here on out. And then the other side of the fork in the road, nobody's asking, okay, let's just go back to what we were doing. It worked just fine. And, it is going to be a split. And I just hope more people take the path that we wanted to make sure that we got this done right, got it right the first time, and we're right going forward.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting way of looking at it. And hopefully that is the path that most people are taking. And like you said, I think if it's the patients and the tenants that are driving these or asking these questions, that it's, I think hopefully going to push more people in that right direction, for sure. So any other pieces of advice or thoughts on everything that's been going on?
Well, there's a lot, and we spent a lot of time trying to educate, as I had mentioned, and I hope folks that watch this video take the time to read the Wells-Riley study, to look at ASHRAE standards. Um, we also have a segment on a website called Filter News, and Mr. Phil Maybee writes some blogs for us, and we put those on there. And he had an initial response to the COVID-19, pointing out some different things in regards to what we're seeing, if anybody would like to take some time to kind of look at that. As well as let's look at the silver lining here, the smog in cities, and looking at the smell. You don't really smell as much of the Houston traffic. I know being on the roads, I've absolutely loved loved the lack of traffic around Houston. I've been getting spoiled as I've been going out to visit customers and everything, and being able to get to and from the med center without congestion, and to some other areas. It's been pretty fantastic.
Well, Nicole, really enjoyed having you on the show today. Like I said, I'm more from the water side of the building, so for me, this was a really good learning experience about air filtration and everything else that's kind of going on on that side of the building. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. I hope this reaches a good audience, and we get a better level of understanding out there. It'll be really important going forward.
Definitely. And like I said, we'll have links in the description in the video for people to be able to find some of these guidelines that you referenced, to be able to find the Filterman website, and hopefully be able to reach out and make those changes to their building that's needed to be able to be safe during this COVID-19 pandemic and going forward.
Absolutely.
All right. And also want to thank everyone for watching or listening today. Hope everybody is staying safe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Building Value.